There are about 500 species of sharks distributed in all the world's oceans. And certainly not all of them, but by any means, are endangered, but a number of them are. And unfortunately, it's typically the large members of the shark families that are in trouble for many reasons. But the main reason at this stage is the increased demand for shark fin soup, primarily in China. But so these fins move through the Hong Kong fish market and then into China. And it's this this level of fishing effort, which is certainly unprecedented in terms of human activities, that is having a significant toll on shark populations. And it is all kinds of sharks. It's whale sharks, it's hammerhead sharks, it's white sharks. The finning is pretty indiscriminate. Certainly different species are worth more or less, but the fishing level is something that sharks simply can't handle. And that's a function largely of their biology. So unlike cod, for instance, where a female cod might spawn 3 or 4 million eggs every spawning bout, sharks are a lot more like large mammals. They actually typically have gestation periods of 1 to 2 years, so it takes a long time for them between having babies. And they only have 1 to 10 pups every litter. So again, they're actually more mammalian than they are like fish. So put it together, you have sharks that are quite old when they first reproduce. They're living to very old ages. They typically have very low mortality rates naturally, and so all that combines to make sharks very susceptible to any kind of human activity or any kind of human-induced mortality. And we're seeing that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing the ramifications of that industrial fishing effort on sharks that's taking its toll throughout the world's oceans. So there is some debate as to exactly how many sharks are killed every year. There's been estimates as high as 100 million. That may be a little high, but certainly tens of millions of sharks have been caught and killed every year. And it's a really big number, and it's a number that shark populations simply are not able to sustain. I think the question of why people should care about sharks goes back to what we are looking for in the oceans. And I think we should care about sharks in the same way that we care about lions in Africa, in the same way that we care about any wild terrestrial habitat, any habitat on land, where we're about probably 150 years behind in the ocean compared to land. And so we're now doing things in terms of ocean conservation. If you could imagine being back in equatorial Africa, perhaps 150 years ago, that's the kind of stage that we're at. So we haven't got to the point of no return. We still have reasonably intact wild ocean ecosystems. But we're getting really close to the tipping point where we will no longer be able to maintain them. And so we've got perhaps 10 years where a concentrated effort in terms of conserving these large apex predators will ensure their survival for perhaps the next 200 years. But we've come to that tipping point where the action needs to happen now. And so if you care about a wild ocean, if you care about having your children able to see large sharks, large tunas actually in the wild doing their natural thing, then the time to act is now. Well, the sharks do the same things that lions do in Africa, that tigers do in Asia. They are the top predator, and therefore they are basically keeping a rein on the populations of the animals at trophic levels below them. So if you take out a trophic level, that simply increases the abundance of animals at that level below. And so then you have all kinds of issues that healthy ecosystems simply don't have. Reduction in diversity, and diversity is a pretty good indicator of how resilient communities might be to, for instance, climate change. So at the moment we have a changing ocean. In some sense, the best way to protect what we have and to guarantee a future for the oceans as we know it today is to maintain the current diversity that we have, and apex predators play important roles in maintaining diversity by stopping populations at lower trophic levels expanding and removing or reducing diversity within those different trophic levels. So they are that's how important sharks are. So I think an ocean without sharks is an ocean without the is an ocean without the largest animals that live in the ocean. So in some sense, it's an ocean without some of the more charismatic animals in the ocean. It is an ocean of reduced diversity. It's an ocean that has lowered resilience to some of the climate change impacts that we've already started to see and will be seeing a lot more of as we go forward. It is in some sense, it's an ocean that is no longer wild in a real sense. And I think that you get a sense of that in the United States, for instance. If you can imagine the Great Plains without grizzly bears, without wolves, it becomes a very different environment in terms of how humans experience it, and I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about removing sharks. It's the end of wild oceans as we know them.